Lesson 11, we're going to be subtracting fractions, and today we are going to be focusing on method 1 of subtracting fractions. There are 3 different methods that we're going to learn about, and then you can pick which one works best for you. The equation that we're going to be working with is 1 3/4 minus 3/5. When we're working with subtraction, we want to make sure that we identify our original fraction or the amount that we're starting with. The reason that we want to is because with subtraction, we have to keep track of that original whole because we're taking away from it. And if we get confused between the two amounts, we might end up with the wrong answer. So I'll be using these boxes to keep track of my original amount. So for this problem, I start with 1 3/4. Step 1 is we want to analyze our equation for an estimate so that at the end we can check the reasonableness of our answer. And the way that we do that is we take a look at our wholes, and we have one whole, and in this fraction we don't have any wholes. So I'm going to think about this reasonableness, this estimate, as 1 minus 0, and I'm leaving out the fractions because I know those are pieces. And so my estimate is going to be around 1. So when I get to the end and I'm checking the reasonableness of our answer, I know that any answer that's around 1 or close to 1 is going to be reasonable. So step 2 is we want to rewrite our mixed number, which is our original fraction, a mixture of a whole number and a fraction, using an addition sentence. So what that'll look like is we're just going to show with parentheses just to help keep our brain right and keep it organized. We're going to rewrite it as an addition and as an addition sentence. And what it's going to be is your first number is going to be your whole number, and your second is going to be your fraction. So I'm just going to take my 1 and put it there, and then take my 3/4. And so I've just rewritten 1 3/4 as 1 plus 3/4. I haven't changed what I'm doing at all, and then I'll add on my 3/5 here at the end. And remember, I'm keeping track of my whole, and my wholes are this 1 and the 3/4. So step 3 is that we want to rewrite the whole number as a fraction, and we want to use the denominator of the fraction that we're subtracting, which in this case is 3/5, and that denominator of that subtracting fraction is 5. So what that would look like, and I'm going to keep my parentheses just so I can keep in my head that this is my original fraction. This 1 is going to become 5 over 5, so 5 parts out of 5, which is still equal to 1. I've just rewritten it. And then I'm going to add my 3/4. And then I'm minusing my 3/5. And then still keeping track of our whole, which is that 5 over 5, or 1 3/4. So step 4 is we're going to reorder to subtract the like units. And we've talked about how the commutative property only applies to addition, and that is still true. You can't just mix up the numbers. But when we're working with subtracting numbers, we can kind of reorder as long as our whole, our original part, stays at the front. Like, for example, if I had the problem 5 minus 2 minus 1, that would be equal to 5 minus 2 is 3, minus 1 is 2. I could rewrite that as 5 minus 1 minus 2. 5 minus 1 is 4, minus 2 is still 2. And the answer is the same because I kept my beginning amount the same. So this the same thing is going to apply here with our fractions. As long as we keep one of our wholes, our whole here at the beginning, 5 minus 5, we can reorder these two parts in the end, and I can group together my like units. So 5/5 and 3/5, those have like units, so I can rewrite it as 5/5 minus 3/5, and then I'm going to add on this part here and 3/4. So I've reordered and grouped together those like units, and still keeping track of my original whole, my 5/5, and I've started with that just like I started that with my whole numbers, and then remembering that that 3/4 is also a part of my original whole. The next part of step 4 is to solve the like units part of the equation. So the like units part of the equation, I'll just show with parentheses here, is where we have 5/5 minus 3/5. And when we're subtracting, our whole stays the same, so we still have 5 parts in our whole, but we can subtract our numerators or subtract how many parts we have. So we started with 5 parts and we're taking away 3 of those parts, so we are left with 2 parts. So I've solved this part of my equation, and then I'm going to bring down the part that's left, that 3/4. So now I have 2/5 plus 3/4. So step 5, now with our remaining fractions, we want to find those like units again, because we have fifths and fourths, and we can't do this problem until we find a common denominator or like unit. So I'm going to put in my parentheses here to show my 2 separate fractions. And my first fraction is that 2/5. And to find our equivalent fraction, the only thing that we can multiply by is 1. So I'm going to show that huge 1 there. But we can end up renaming that 1, which we'll do here in a minute. Then my other fraction is going to be 3/4, and we're going to rename that by also multiplying by 1, because we don't want to change the amount or the amount of parts that we have. We just want to rename them so that we're able to add them together. So the way that we have been talking about finding those equivalent fractions is by renaming and multiplying the numerator and the denominator by the denominator of the opposite fraction. So working with 2/5, want to multiply the numerator and denominator by the denominator of the opposite fraction, which is 4. So we're going to rename our 1 to 4/4. And then 3/4, numerator and denominator by the denominator of the opposite fraction, which is 5. So we're going to rename to 5/5. And then we can solve for this equation. So it's going to be 5 times 4 is 20 parts in our whole. And the amount of parts that we have is 2 times 4, which is 8. Plus, let's fix that, 8. Plus the 3/4 renamed, our new amount of parts is 4 times 5, which is 20, which you'll notice is a like unit with my first fraction. And then how many parts we have is 3 times 5, which is 15. So we renamed our units to 8/20 plus 15/20. All right, step 6 is solve and simplify, and I've just moved this renamed fractions up here so we have a little bit more room. So when we're adding, we know that our whole stays the same. If my first whole has 20 parts, my second whole has 20 parts, and my answer also has to have 20 parts. And now we can add the amount of parts we have by just adding the numerators. 8 plus 15 is equal to 23 parts in a 20-part whole. And now we're going to simplify our answer. As you see here, our whole is 20 parts, but we have 23, which means that we could fill in a whole whole. And so we want to ask ourselves, can I make another whole? Can I rewrite this as 2 different fractions? I have 20 parts out of a 20-part whole, which would also be equal to 1. If I take out those 20 parts, I'm also left with 3 extra parts of a 20-part whole. So I could rewrite 23 over 20 as 20 over 20 plus 3 over 20. I could rename that 20 to 1, and then I am left with 3 parts out of 20. So our answer here for this original problem of 1 3/4 minus 3/5 is going to be 1 3/20. And we check our reasonableness of our answer, and we said that our estimate would give us something around 1. These answers are very close. 1 3/20 is very close to 1, so my answer is reasonable.